So, Doc, due to popular demand in the comment section, I think it's kind of known now that the audience requires attention on our pets as an intermission between these depressing topics that we often talk about. Yeah, I wanted to introduce you to my old lady. One second. Hope you don't mind if I show you my wiener on camera. This is Nellie. She's my old woman. She's middle aged. She's 8 years old now. We got our golden retriever because we wanted a golden retriever in the first place, but also because she has a lot of separation anxiety, and we've been realizing that it's just not fair to her that we leave, for long periods of time, and so she needs a friend. So we got our golden, and at first, what the thing about her is she can be very snobby to younger things. Anything that's young, like whether it be young children or younger animals, she knows that they're not mature, so she tries to avoid them. And our golden was really, they're very playful and rough, and she was just not having it because of, she would cross those boundaries. So I noticed that now after we started scolding the golden and correcting her for being too rough, I noticed her attitude change, because she's like, oh, okay, well now they're setting these boundaries, so I feel more comfortable playing with her. And now they're just attached to the hip. They're in love with each other as sisters, So, but I have a question for you. I want to know your opinion on this. Okay, so dogs have a larger vocabulary than we give them credit for, right? Now, my question is, I tell her how pretty she is all the time. I try to tell her how pretty she is. Do you think dogs understand the concept of pretty? If an owner tells them they're pretty, do you think it extends to that much?
No, not really. They can learn a lot more words, but it has to be tied to more concrete things. What they're going to do is they're going to associate certain sounds, like the tones of those words, with you complimenting them, though, that it's something nice. So whatever words you're using when you're talking about how much you love your particular critter, they're going to associate that vocabulary with that expression of love. But being able to differentiate whether you're calling them, pretty or fluffy, or like my little fat boy, things like that, they're not going to hear that word and be able to connect it to, oh, he's saying I'm fat, like he's my little. Oh,
gotcha.
But they're not going to pick that up,
I wish she would, because I just want her to know how pretty she is. I try to always tell her, and I just, I don't know if she knows it, but I feel like maybe she feels insecure when she sees dogs that may be prettier than her. So I just try to give her that affirmation.
Yeah, it's great. The ones that they're going to pick up are ones that are that they can tie more directly to some kind of action. But dogs actually can. Dogs can easily learn about 100 distinct words and associate them with different things, and they can do that, but it's difficult to get them to associate particular words with much more abstract concepts like aesthetics.
Yeah,
but there's a lot they can actually learn and relate to.
Yeah, I've always just been curious about that one little thing. I just, so that kind of answers it.
Yeah.
Where's my tea go?
Cats too can learn rather a lot of words, but it's harder to test them because they're less likely to respond in predictable ways, because dogs want to. Dogs naturally want to please. They were bred to work for us, so they're much more likely to respond directly to the words. Cats can actually learn a significant number of words too, but their reactions are a bit different to them. So it's harder to know exactly how far that capacity goes, but they do learn rather a lot.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. I feel like we're barely scratching the surface in the animal kingdom and animal communication. Like we're like a fraction of a percent of the research there.
Right. I've loved that there's a lot more research on this now. So there's been some great articles in the last few years, about both dog and cat psychology, as well as continuing to study tons of other critters, like dolphins and whales, other primates, things like that. People are starting to learn, or birds. There's all kinds of stuff learning, but there's quite a few birds that not only can mimic the sounds of languages, but actually develop a vocabulary and express sentences themselves. that they can put things together. So, but we're just getting to where we're really beginning to understand how some of this works. So yeah, we're going to learn a lot more in coming decades.
Yeah, especially with the advent of AI and communications technologies
Mhm.
and all kinds of different electromagnetic scans we can do on the brain.
Right,
It's
exactly.
insane.
Yeah, we'll be able to start feeding data in, and computers can help us to figure out, okay, how are they actually communicating? What language are they using? Because they do have ways to communicate. It's not as sophisticated as our symbolic communication, but symbolic
Yeah.
communication is ultimately it's an animal feature. That's why language developed for us in the first place. So they do have forms of language. We just have to start figuring them all out.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Now, of course, we're talking about cuddly animals, and I think that might be a good segue into one of the other beautiful elements of Islam, and that is compassion towards living things and tenets against animal cruelty, which I want to dive into. And it's something that is not emphasized a lot, just like environmentalism is not emphasized a lot when talking about Islam, but nonetheless it is there in the Quran. So could we go into some of the things like that about Islam that make it such a beautiful element to our humanity, and a beautiful element, especially given the fact that there are 2 billion Muslims on this planet that believe in these things. So I don't know where you and Rashy want to start on that, but I kind of want to get into it if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it it definitely wanders off a little bit from our topic, but sure, yeah. The I think one thing to note is that there are common elements in, well, just in human mythic traditions in general about our relation to nature, and a lot of them can be quite beautiful. And preserving elements of that can be tricky, because especially within the context of the big monotheistic faiths, because what they have a tendency to do, and there's within Islam, just like within Judaism and Christianity, there is this interesting internal tension between, on the one hand, respecting nature and being a steward to the natural world, and then humans being distinctly different and set above the natural world by God and have a special destiny, which is an element of all three faiths. Which means that within the faith, you can end up emphasizing one or the other, because there is that tension. So within these faiths, there is an ability to revere all of nature and other animals, but there's also the possibility of interpreting things so badly that you can easily destroy nature too. Because because the emphasis on humans, if you twist that a bit, you can also downplay the rest of the connections. But all these faiths do have bits in the text that really point you in that direction toward us being caretakers of the world, and having to respect all of nature and preserve it. All this beauty in the world is is Allah's creation, so we should love it and we should care for it. So I loved when people do pull out and focus on those issues, because I think, to me, it emphasizes the beauty in them. For the same reason that I love it when people focus on the social justice components in Islam,
Yeah.
as opposed to others, because it depends on what you want to run with, what's most important to you.
Yeah. I agree. Now, Rashi, we left off before we took our break on talking about the typical Islamophobic tropes, the good old fashioned ones that I'm sure you're just sick of hearing, but I've seen you hold your own very well in some of these TikTok lives. But I've also seen instances where the attacks on your faith were so blatantly dumb and blatantly vile that you didn't know how to respond. You were almost like the cat got your tongue in that moment. And that's when I think there's an instance where I stepped in. I was like, okay, I saw what was happening to you, is the sheer amount of hurt that you were feeling was overwhelming your ability to talk. And that's when I said, okay, I'm going to take this one, Rashi, take a break. Let me beat this guy a little bit down. Let let me get in this ring. But I want to talk about these instances that you've experienced as a Muslim, defending the plight of the Palestinians who are currently going through some of the most atrocious acts known to man that we've seen in the modern era. Could you go into some of those, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So like one of the I would say biggest misconceptions about Islam is that like it promotes terrorism or violence, and that couldn't be like further from the truth. There's no like text or scripture that endorses violence. Um, Actually, killing an innocent person in Islam is, I believe, one of the biggest sins after like worshiping another god. Um, so that's just blatantly wrong. In the Quran, it says if you kill an innocent person, it's as if you killed like all of mankind, and if you save a life, it's as if you saved all of mankind. I might be butchering that a little bit, but so this idea that like Muslims are just violent and promote terror because it's in the Quran is just completely untrue, and it's just ignorance. Another one I hear a lot too is that like, oh, Muslims believe in Allah, like that's some like other god. It's not the same God, you know.
Yeah.
And obviously, Allah is just the Arabic name for God. And when you tell people this, like they don't even want to believe it. I've even heard people say that our Jesus is a different Jesus.
That's crazy.
Because we say it in Arabic, you know? Um,
Yeah.
so like I said, it all just the people that speak about Islam the most are the ones that are completely uneducated about it, have never even looked into it.
Yeah, I always find it funny that people don't get that Arabic Christians also say Allah, or like
Mm-hmm.
Allah Akbar would be said by Christians as well. It's literally just I mean, and it has the same. It has an much earlier root to it. You know the God, in there actually does relate back to on some level an early form of God's name in Hebrew. There's this.
In Aramaic as
It's just
well,
a
I
later.
believe it's
Yeah, exactly. It
Fatima.
passes from the Hebrew, Aramaic, into Islam. Exactly. It's just a way of pronouncing a name for God. But people just think, yeah, it's somehow completely different. What are you talking about? Just listen to the Christians in the area. They're saying Allah too.
I actually had a conversation with someone before that didn't even believe that Christian Palestinians or like Christian Arabs existed. They just thought like
Yeah.
all Arabs are Muslim, and like would not believe it at all. Like they were so stuck in like, no, I'm a Christian and there's Christian Arabs. Like no, there's no way. And like I said,
Well, it brings up the most blatant example of that with one of the Israeli officials when being interviewed. I forgot by who, or I think maybe it was BBC, where they were talking about the churches in Gaza that were being destroyed by the IOF bombardment, and she says there are no Christians in Gaza. Well, I mean, and the thing about it is, we know that she knows there are.
yeah.
But my question is, which audience was that directed towards? Because it doesn't take a lot of Googling to find out that there are Christian churches in Gaza. Some of the oldest Christian churches are in Gaza. So who was this directed towards? It was directed towards evangelical dumbasses in the West who will not take the time to research whether that's fact or not. But she, and the fact that she was so confident in being able to say that live on TV without any journalistic integrity, it shows that, wow, maybe they're confident because people are that ignorant, and they will just take that and run with
Mm-hmm.
it. They won't ever find out the fact that Israel just destroyed one of the oldest buildings known to Christianity, in fact. So let's go into some more tropes that have been thrown at you. I saw one, and I'm hesitant to bring this up just by the sheer disrespectful nature of this conversation, but the idea of the prophet marrying a girl who was 9 years old is a very common one. You constantly hear it,
Mhm.
and I've heard it debunked a million times. But and there's obviously a lot of people in the audience are like, yeah, that's completely been debunked. That's not accurate. But we have to understand that a lot of people still believe this. So can we? I want to pick that apart a little bit, Doc, if you don't mind, and Rashy.
Well, on that one in particular, one of the problems is that a great many Muslims themselves talk about her age that way. I mean, the fact that there are conflicts in the sources, and that you can actually find a pretty simple arithmetic error that gives you a way of saying, yeah, no, she was betrothed, younger on, and they didn't consummate it until she was in her later teens. It makes sense, but simple fact is, huge numbers of Muslims take for granted a particular Sahih hadith that makes her quite young, and then Christians can point to that and say, look. So it's a problem both inside and outside the faith. It just depends on which text you want to use and how you want to use it.
It's just like different denominations in Christianity propagate
Mhm.
some, inaccuracies that come across as being very, inappropriate.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, there are wild
there's so
differences
many
in interpretation
denominations.
between within any individual faith. There's a tremendous spectrum of difference, and people tend to make these weird assumptions. Like I get the same thing about they're going to impose their Shakira law on us. Sharia is not a single thing. It's not a monolith. There's a ton of different completely contradictory schools of interpretation on it. So to say that you can just point to one set of rules and say this is Islamic law is itself nonsensical, but people do it. And that's the fear mongering they're building around. So the issue you're pointing to here, yeah, it just depends upon which one they want to point to and how they want to misuse it.
Yeah. Rashi, going into that, what are some other things that you've experienced? Like that I know it's a lot because you've been through a lot of lives and had a lot of discussions and arguments. And I know it's hard when you have all these memories that they get blended in with each other. But I realize the difficulty in trying to pick out one particular thing. But are there any in particular that you can recall that you want to go into?
Let me think. I think one of the uh, main ones as well is that women in Islam are uh, oppressed and are not given like any rights, and that they're just like submissive, um, which again is so untrue. I think if you read the Quran, you see how many rights a woman actually does have and how many responsibilities actually a husband has um, towards his wife. And I think they just see a woman wearing hijab and they're like, oh, no, she was forced, and uh, she's oppressed, and um, that couldn't be really further from the truth.
And throughout my experience in Palestine, the respect that Palestinian men give to their women, and especially their mothers, being one of the key components of Palestinian society, is reverence of the mother. The belief that the mother is truly like that strength in the family. There's nothing to describe the love that a Palestinian male has for his mom, and their reverence for their wife. It's so neglected in Western society as far as how we talk about it, and it's viewed through that prism that you talk about, where they use rules that happen in Saudi Arabia as an example of attributing it to all of Muslims. When in fact the way things are going in Saudi Arabia right now is that the Saudi government and their laws, we're talking about elites here passing laws. This isn't Islam coming together and passing these laws that we see in like places like Saudi Arabia. So, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think what might be most important for people to really wrap their head around is that there is the same differences in belief in Islam as you find in any other religion. So you can find strains of evangelical Christianity that argue that women should still, be silent, sit in the back, can't have any authority. They need to be completely subservient to their husbands and obey their husbands. There are Muslims who say the same thing. There are Muslims who make arguments for controlling women, making sure that they don't have a social role, they only have this domestic role. And I've even seen some imams defend beating women. But there's also huge numbers that say, no, it says you can't do that. It directly contradicts it, right? And yes, there are definitely passages in Quran that make it impossible to say, yes, you should beat your wife. But there are also passages you can use to support it. So it just depends very much on the interpretive character. And what we do is we selectively pick certain elements because of the overall phobia, the political enemy. So you're going to point to certain features, certain interpretations, and say this is what Muslim means. It goes back to your earlier comment about the Klan. We don't use them as normative Christianity and say all Christians are like this and they're going to burn crosses, but some definitely are. So the selective emphasis on some of the worst expressions of Islam to be emblematic of Muslims as a whole is about as false as it possibly gets. But it's true of the diversity in all religions and the way that we always selectively use things to other people to make them an enemy.
Yeah. Now, I want to go into more ignorances thrown at Muslims that we commonly see in American media. I think the disrespect of women. We had a guest on who brought up a really interesting concept. It was surrounding the topic of white supremacy in feminist spaces. And I found that to be a groundbreaking statement because it's something we do not talk about in this whole conversation of Islamophobia, and that is white supremacy, which takes on a feminist form and is used towards Islam, used to make Islam out to be this woman-hating concept. It's the same thing. It's just like white supremacy takes on a lot of different forms. It takes on the form of economics, of religion, of culture. But one of the latest weapons of Zionism has been "quote unquote" feminism, using what happened on October 7th and spreading lies about systemic sexual violence against Israeli citizens by the groups that crossed over on October 7th, the Qassam fighters. It's been hijacked by white supremacy and inserted into the feminist circles. And it's something that a lot of Palestinians have been vocal about. And Rashy, I wanted to know if you were able to go into that a little bit of what you experienced in your dialogue with pro-Israelis.
I mean, again, it just kind of goes back to the misconception about women in Islam in general, that they're oppressed. What women in Islam have just as much rights to like education as men do. They have a woman in Islam, when she earns money, it's her money. She doesn't have to give it to anyone. But a man's money, he has the obligation to take care of his wife. What else? I can't even think right now.
It's okay. It's okay.
But I mean, they're just, if you look into like how women in Islam are held, they're held to like a higher standard, and it's funny that white supremacists or feminists kind of look at women in Islam are less than because they choose to cover, but I think that actually gives them more power when you dress modestly versus conforming to society where everyone is like getting more and more naked every day. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I've heard that. I've heard people tell me that so many times about how the hijab has been empowering on a feminine level for many Muslim women. That's how a lot of them feel. They do it voluntarily because it's in their mind. It's them taking an assertive stance on their faith and their respect and reverence towards Allah,
Mm-hmm.
and that stance on their faith empowers them to feel confident in it, to wear the hijab and to show people, hey, I revere Allah. This is why I do it, and I'm making this of my own of my own choice, of my own conscious choice, not because I'm told to do it, not because it's cultural pressure, but because I choose to live this way because of my belief system. That in and of itself is very empowering. But I see it being weaponized in the complete opposite way by people attacking Islam and trying to spread Islamophobia.
Yeah, there's something at least to keep in mind about this use, and I want to at least make clear that this is a conscious misuse. It's a misappropriation of feminist discourses.
Mm-hmm.
It's not actually a feminist position to attack, hijabis and whatever. The key here is that nationalist groupings, nationalists are going to look for weapons that they can make use of. And the simple fact is, certain ideas have become normalized over time in the West, like that women have, more social rights or whatever here. It wasn't Christianity that made that possible. Christians opposed that, but it became socially normalized. And now conservative Christians can sometimes have views of women that, their ancestors would have opposed. And what they're doing is they're selectively misusing those discourses, because feminism has always had a radical core component to it. It has always been critical of it. And misusing those kind of liberal and feminist discourses to attack other people, it's just another manifestation of this racism. That's all it really is, because the diversity is always there. There's tons and tons of Christian groups that still maintain very conservative dress. I mean, the idea of covering the head long predates Islam and was quite common in Judaism and Christianity, and still shows up in many communities there. It's just the secularizing process started a little earlier in Europe than it started in the Middle East, which means that right now we're going through a lot of those transformations and changes that the European world already did. So you're pointing to something that actually was a core feature of Christian identity and saying it's bad, which I find hilarious, because, the idea of Christian women going around with their heads uncovered would have been so scandalous to a lot of people, not very far back, and now today it's something we associate specifically with Islam, but we shouldn't. It's a very selective misuse. And I do love that within the Muslim community, there are such variable interpretations of these things, of women's rights and whatnot. You can read Quran in ways that are extremely empowering to women, but you can also find ways to justify oppressing them, because at the end of the day, neither patriarchy nor feminism come from religions, but religions can express both. So the patriarchy that is expressed by a lot of Muslims isn't because the religion told them to do it. It's because the area was already patriarchal, and they adopted that, and they express it in Islamic ways, but it's just dipshit patriarchy. It has nothing to do with the religion at all. These religions can be misused to attack women, but that's true of literally all of them. And arguably, this is one of the things I find most amusing in going through this kind of material for people. If you look strictly on a scriptural level, it should be easier for Islam to embrace feminism and to empower women, because the scriptures are actually nicer to women. The Jewish and Christian scriptures are a lot more horrifying to women. So it's interesting that people look at those religious cultures as somehow better on this issue. It's not the religion that's the issue. It's the changes in secular society that ended up pushing those elements of the religion to the side. Islam has fewer barriers present in the scriptures to limit women's capacity than either Christians or Jews had. So obviously feminism is going to exist there too. And feminism has been in the Middle East about as long as it has been in Europe too. It's developing there in the 18th and 19th century. It's not a new thing either. But the key that people often run into is that conservatives, wherever they are going to take similar views on things. They're going to hold to some really shitty ideas. And there's plenty of conservatives in the Middle East, as there are in lots of other places that were, colonized, partly destroyed, and, Europeans frequently empowering the worst people possible. So yeah, a lot of dipshit conservative ideas become socially important in the Middle East. But that's a historical contingency. It's not the religion. It's not the faith. You go back a bit, and it was very, very different. It's the same thing you have in tons of other areas where I like pointing out that at different times in its own history, Christianity has also been very, very tolerant of tons of differences, including queer people. But always the power structures come back to opposing it in different circumstances. And you have very similar circumstances in the Muslim world, where it was very, very tolerant of queer cultures and but then there's clampdowns on it. So it just depends on which elites and which interpretations end up becoming dominant. Those are always the historical forces that drive that. It's not the religion, but we have this weird sense of picking certain features that we have heard of this religion, saying this is that religion, and then we blame the religion itself. And that doesn't make sense for any of these.
And I find it interesting that in Western Christianity, the emphasis, as far as books in the Bible, has always been the letters of Paul. Paul has been pretty much the poster boy of Christianity as far as scripture is concerned. And if you read Paul's writings, they're extremely sexist. It's Jesus's teachings are not. There's no hint of it. In fact, his relationship with Mary Magdalene, his compassion towards her, clear example of that. But if you move into Paul's writing, you move into an entirely different style of Christianity, and that's the one that Christians emphasize, not the Christianity of Jesus, but the Christianity of Paul, which I found interesting.
And Paul, at the end of the day, is more Roman than not, and the Romans were an extremely misogynistic culture. So that comes through. So it's the cultural features. It's the cultural and structural features that always create these things. Patriarchy, it was not created by any religion. It predates all of the religions that we know of. Right? It's a cultural and political feature that religions can take in and you can either add in elements or interpret elements in ways that support it. But at the end of the day, it's not a fundamental component of all of them. You can get past it. I just find it interesting that it should be easier to get past it in Islam, but Islam we associate with this much more conservative vision. But it's largely because of the historical circumstances we're in. It's nothing to do with the religion at all. The religion is actually much nicer than Christianity is.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. And well, speaking of religion being misappropriated, I think that a good place to go from here is let's talk about how it's been appropriated in a positive way. And I want to talk to you, Rashi, about this. Like I said, we're seeing some of the worst atrocities live, on our phones right now happening in Gaza. It takes an incredible amount of spiritual and mental resilience to navigate that, especially for Palestinians. And it's just very obvious to the world that Islam has played such an amazing role, an important role within the culture of the Gazans specifically, but also Palestinians as a whole, in trying to cope with this horror, this evil that we're seeing. And I mean, you see video footage of doctors in Gaza who are so overwhelmed with the amount of bodies they're seeing come in, and the injuries that they're having to treat with barely any medicine, barely any supplies. But the thing that they've said keeps them going is they said, they give credit to Allah. They just rely on Allah. And we see this strong resilience amongst the Palestinians. And no doubt Islam is a part of that. So I guess my question for you is how has Islam been such a I guess a driving force of resilience amongst the Palestinians and yourself?
I think it's it's the fact that at the end of the day, and this is something that's spoken about a lot in Islam, is that we don't necessarily live for this life. We live for the afterlife. And the world is never going to be just to you. And so you can't try to you're never going to find justice. You're never going to find what you need in this world. And I think that's why you see so many of these Palestinians so, I don't want to say content, but almost like understanding of like this at the end of the day, as traumatic as it is, um, this world is only like a drop in the ocean of what's to come and what you actually live for. And I think that's why I've never seen more people convert to Islam since October 7th. Like the amount of people that I'm seeing who started looking into the religion because of the patience and the perseverance that they've seen the Palestinian people have, um, and started learning about it and actually converted to the religion. Because I mean, and that's how I feel myself. You know, as depressing as it gets, my faith is really all the only thing that gets me through this, is knowing that like the world leaders are not going to help us. The world is not um it's not on our side, but like at the end of the day, God is the most just, and he will take care of, you know, what he needs to take care of.
Yeah. How has it been for you, obviously going through the psychological torment of knowing that your countrymen are being slaughtered and keeping your faith, and at the same time hearing insults, slung in the direction of your religion and your prophet and the Quran, in debating this whole in debating people on this whole conflict? What has it been? What has that been like emotionally for you, I guess?
I mean, I think more so at the beginning it was difficult, but I kind of have to like reinforce my intentions, and I realized that like there's no point in arguing with people, or having conversations with people who don't want to learn, and don't
Hmm.
really care. It's not coming from a place of like, oh, this is what I heard, so like, can you like debunk this for me? It's coming from a place of just like, I just want to beat up on Muslims right now. So I kind of learned to just ignore it, and like I don't really care. Um, uh, but I mean, it's difficult because I feel like we're being attacked from both ways. We're being attacked as Palestinians, and then we're being attacked as Muslims. Um, but at the end of the day, like I said, having faith in God, that He is just, and will take care of, um, the people in Palestine, and will take care of the evil that has caused the situation, is really sometimes the only thing that like gets me through.
Rashi, the cultural exchange that you've been having on TikTok lives, as a Muslim, can you talk about some of the positive aspects and experiences you've had on that have changed your perspective on how you think the world views Islam? I'm sure there's been some encouragements that's been happening. Maybe not. I don't want to speak for you, but um, I just want to hear your perspective on the positive aspects and your interaction with different cultures who are not familiar with Islam, based on your personality.
Yeah, so I think some of the positive would be that people are just now opening up their eyes. I mean, not just about Islam, but about what's happening in Palestine, that they never ever knew was going on and for how long it was going on. Which is why you have this bigger movement of uh, pro-Palestinians now. Um, and then with that, you almost have to dig into um, Islam, because you wonder like how, when you see the images and what's going on in Gaza, like you have to think like, how are they this resilient, and what kind of faith do they have? So um, people looking into the religion and kind of realizing that like, wow, it's not all these misconceptions that I've had from it, maybe from the media or whatever, are actually not true, and it's actually quite a peaceful religion at its core. And so being able to see that, people actually opening their eyes to it, it's kind of amazing to see. And like I've even seen people like convert, take their shahada on TikTok live, um,
Yeah.
which is kind of crazy to see. It just kind of shows where we are with social media and everything. But yeah, I mean, I would say probably the only positive that's come out of this situation.
Do you feel that the positive has made it worth it for you to be engaging like this on a multicultural level and international level on TikTok lives in your discussions about Islam? Do you think that it all the negative taken into account, do you feel that the positive has made it worth it for you? On, I know you've taken an emotional toll in dealing with this, you know, but if you had to weigh it on the scales, what would you say?
I mean, worth it for me as like as an individual, like when I'm weighing like the negative and positive on like social media, yeah. Um, on a bigger scale of like this conflict, I don't know, you know. But through social media and stuff, like I said, yeah, it's difficult. But I mean, it's I'm not complaining about it, you know. It used to bother me um, before at the beginning, but it doesn't bother me anymore. And I think people now are so much more educated on it,
Mm-hmm.
and the other side is kind of dwindling away. There's not, as the days go on and you see just how bad it's getting, it almost is like, you know, once you reach a certain point, you're like, okay, people, they have to stop it now, you know, and it keeps going, and then, you know, like the flower massacre and like a raiding of Al Shifa. It's like it just keeps getting worse. Um, the support for the other side is dwindling. I think every day. That makes that makes it a little bit easier. Um, but yeah, I mean, to me, I don't really. It doesn't affect me negatively that much,
Yeah,
honestly.
that's good because you have come at this whole thing with such um, a very kind-hearted approach. I can give you credit for me wanting to, you know, jump in this movement, and you created that safe space for me to do that by not being judgmental of my rough edges. And I think it was my first time on a TikTok live happened to be a pro-Israel live, a very toxic one at that. Me not knowing that, I went in and was talking to Israelis, and it started off pretty good in the sense that I was telling them, "Hey, I used to live in Israel, and I had some great experiences there. I had some great experiences with Israelis. I used to study Judaism. My wife is of Jewish descent, and I'm raising my son Jewish in that Jewish heritage, and it was all positive." And then but then I started talking about my relationship with the Palestinians and how I saw the reality of things on the ground and the problems that Israel has and how the whole system is, you know, just completely, completely just fucked up. And the treatment of the Palestinians has been completely fucked up. And then the mood in the room changed on a dime.
Well,
And all of a sudden I was the enemy
well,
in the
you
room.
are
And I
like,
think you were witness to
yeah,
that.
you're like their worst nightmare because you can speak about being a former Zionist, being formerly like Islamophobic, um, and realizing and learning on your own and not learning through like social media or anything. You yourself, your story kind of picks apart their narrative, and that's why they hate it, and that's why they attack you. Like for me, it's easy for them to be like, "Oh, you're a Muslim, you're anti-Semitic." I always hear a lot, "Just say it, just say you hate Jews, just say it," you know, because it makes it easier for them. They want you to hate them because it makes it easier for them to hate you. It kind of justifies it for them. So for you, where you organically kind of had, you know, the revelation and kind of changed your mind about it, they hate that. They hate that story. That's why I always said that your story is so important.
And as much as I want to be on a friendly basis with Israelis, I because I had good experience. I had some good memories with Israelis. I had some fun times. You know, I had some great friendships there. But at the same time, I cannot be dishonest with them. You know, as somebody, like, I'm not going to disrespect them by telling them like, oh yeah, you know, it was all rosy over there, and I could see that Israel's on the righteous side. I couldn't tell them that with an honest face, and I'm not going to disrespect them by lying to them. And I had to be honest about how Palestinians helped form the young man that I became. at age 18 years old. Like, I cannot deny that I am a product of Palestine. The way my view on the world, my morals, my moral compass was set by the Palestinians when I was 18 years old. So I have to tell them that, but immediately it just triggers them, and it's like, oh, well, you now all of a sudden you hate Jews and you hate Israelis. It's like, no, and it's this false dichotomy that they've created, that
Yeah, there's something here that really could help if we want to understand the way that these hatreds develop and thrive, because I mean, this is something especially you get spending time with a lot of the post-colonial literature, trying to understand those dynamics, because the hatreds that build up in order to justify imperialism, nation states, capital, they can fall apart on personal levels. On some level, the other, capital O, is needed for the identity formation of the oppressor as well. So when you actually show to an Israeli that Muslims are no necessary threat to them, it actually is challenging part of their own identity, the way that they understand themselves and the world, because that colonizer mentality, the sense of that you need to justify power relations. Again, this develops over and over and over again across the early modern period, which is why our modern racisms and hatreds are quite different from earlier types of hatreds and othering. There's a way in which they're tied very much into the structures of empire, capital, and nation. And as soon as you challenge that view of the other, as soon as you show them that the other is just a person just like you, it is a profound threat, and one that can terrify people, because it's not just about showing them a particular group of people aren't bad. It's challenging who they think they are. Like, their entire understanding of the world is at risk. So some people will really double down on that. They'll shut it out, they'll tune it out, and they'll dive into the hatred because it helps to preserve and reinforce that comforting sense of self that they have. The much harder thing is the process that you guys are describing, and that what you had to go through is when you actually have to question your own fundamental beliefs, your own identity, and come out of it different, from that experience. So you encountered the other in Palestine. You encountered something that had only been caricatured in your society, and now you're seeing it. And through that confrontation, it actually led you to challenge something in yourself. For a lot of people, that's very difficult to do. And I think one of the things, if we're ever going to get over a lot of these, the hatreds, the phobias, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, whatever, what we really have to do is get better at facilitating that reflection, that internal process. Because shaming people out of racism is never going to work. You have to expose them to the other, and then do it in a way that helps them to unfuck themselves, to go through that process of letting go of that and transforming who they really are. But the identity formation is the key to this, really.
It's a tried and true thing. I mean, I'm testament. I'm evident. I'm the evidence. I think back, like, what if they did not assign me to that dorm in Jerusalem at Hebrew University campus? I think back on that. I'm like, oh my God. And this is where my spiritual part of me comes out. It's like, I as a man of faith, I have to give credit to Allah on that, because like, if my fate of becoming pro-Palestinian, when I think back on it, all boiled down to a little piece of paper that they drew the building number and the floor number. That's it. If they would have put a different number, any of those two numbers would have been different. I could have been wound up on the floor, most likely with a bunch of Israelis who probably would have been, continued this. They would have, propagated my confirmation bias against Palestinians. They would have filled my head with more propaganda, more than I ever even knew from church back at home. But instead, no, I wound up on a dorm floor full of Palestinian Muslims. And I'm just
Or
thinking
you
to
could have been
myself,
lucky and been with, because again, there are tons of Israeli leftists that are not at all like that shit. That
No, true. Yeah.
and you could have been you could have been in a dorm with some of them too. You never know. There's but those individual chance circumstances, they
Hmm.
can be transformative. But many people would not have the strength internally to face that challenge to their identity. And I think the key for us is to figure out a way to make that easier for the people who wouldn't naturally do it. Because you can put another Christian American in exactly the same situation and in that dorm, and they would have come out continuing to hate Palestinians. It would not have actually changed them. Just encountering the other can't, on its own, doesn't help everybody. But we could find a way to do it.
Well, funny you say that, because the only other American Christian on the entire flight there and in the dorm, we were assigned to the same dorm. He was, I won't say his name, but he's a ex-Marine, Christian evangelical, very pro-Zionist, very pro-Israel. He was also on the same dorm. Me and him were good friends, and we were kind of like, he was like my buddy that I would go with to go hang out at the clubs and stuff. He continued down that path of Zionism. And it was interesting to see how we went two separate ways on that. And where I wound up hanging out with my Palestinian friends and going to their villages and living with their families and, breaking bread and going to with the West Bank and all, everywhere. And he went a different path of being more and more pro-Israel. And it was fascinating to see that. But just, I think it was just also the chemistry with me and Palestinians. They just clicked. The Palestinians were never judgmental, and I am a very easy person to judge. Just given given how I am as a person, I'm very easy to judge, and so the way that Palestinians just accepted the way I was, and the way they saw the value in me despite all my flaws, it made it easier. It made it easier for me to more organically, integrate with their culture. So, but it's just fascinating how the little things in life that are so fateful when you look back on it, and how it changes your outlook.
Yeah, exactly. I would love us to get to, if we're really going to tackle things like Islamophobia, we have to stop counting on just chance encounters, the right people in the right place, and on individual psychology, and find a way to help people to break that stuff down more easily. Because for many people, the process you're describing is more elusive. It's harder to get to.
Yeah.
The sort of critical self-examination necessary in order to do that. And the way that that empire has always worked, the way that capital and nations have always worked, they've always had to depend upon exclusions. They've always had to create this other in order to fashion its own identity to justify it. So at the end of the day, if we can find a way to tackle these issues for Islamophobia, you're also finding a way to challenge the way that a lot of elites in the West want us to conceive of ourselves and to keep oppressing other people.
I wanted to dive into a very positive moment in history between Islam and the Western world, and Christianity and Judaism, concerning the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. I tend to bring that up because I feel like it could be something in the past that we can look to possibly build on in the future, because of the inspiring dynamics that happen within the House of Wisdom of Baghdad. And I don't know if you want to go into that, if you're willing to go into that, Doc.
I mean, I can share a few thoughts on it if people want. Sure. It's more than just a specific location. There is a particular aesthetic that develops at that point in the Abbasid Caliphate that is simply more open to different ideas, to challenging preconceptions. And actually, the first person put in charge to create this whole system was actually a Christian. It was a Nestorian Christian that was put in charge of it by the Caliph and told, collect all the books, get every book you can find that we don't already have, make copies of them, send them out to different places. So when we look at what survives of Aristotle's work to us, it's mostly because those pieces were translated into Arabic and preserved that way. and then could be translated back out afterwards. But they collected so much material, and that created conditions for self-identified Muslim philosophers. You go back to people like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, people who are Muslim but are actually encountering Aristotle and Plato and thinking through all these different ideas. And it actually created a significant climate for scientific advances, mathematical advances, philosophy, all kinds of things started developing there and spread around. The problem with looking at that period and connecting it to the contemporary world is that a lot of those dynamics are very specific to that moment in the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Christians who were involved in it were also Middle Eastern Christians. The exposure of Europeans to Bait al-Hikmah is all secondhand. It's more from acquiring books and translating some of that material in later. The only place with really sustained interaction between what we can call, I guess, Western Catholics and that kind of environment is actually in Al-Andalus, not the House of Wisdom, because there you have a significant Muslim, Jewish, and Christian population all living side by side, all influencing each other. So they're sharing ideas and their different forms of mysticism. They're sharing philosophical concepts. And it's a significant avenue for the movement of a bunch of ideas that were circulating in the Muslim world into Europe, because you have the multilingual people present there that can translate the stuff into Arabic and then intrigue other people and start that process. But the tolerance you're dealing with is there's a tendency sometimes, and I'm not saying this is you or this is the theme, but there is a tendency sometimes to overstate the degrees of cooperation and tolerance that existed there. There was very much an understanding of Islamic supremacy. Muslims were still, Jews and Christians were not the social equals of Muslims, and the Muslim revelation was held to be the more perfect revelation. That's just a theological development. But there is still a tolerance of it that says you can continue to practice Christianity or Judaism because these are also revealed religions. You've got your books. It's fine. But this is still very much an Islamic state. But there's always been periods where, again, this is why I tend to point people back to the social and structural features. The conditions that existed at that point in the High Middle Ages and the Abbasid Caliphate meant that it was relatively wealthy, not threatened by any major outside forces, and therefore there was the possibility of encouraging that kind of creative interaction, the sharing of ideas. So, Jewish physicians and, Christian philosophers and whatnot, they could play a part in this whole process and be welcomed into it. But when the circumstances change, that very much can change too. And the Mongol threat ends up ultimately changing the conditions for that kind of interaction. It actually hardens a lot of attitudes among Muslims towards their other minorities, but it's just a response to a threat. And there simply wasn't a threat at that point. So if we want to think about how you can get people of these different religions all to love each other and focus on that fact that they have more in common than not, and hell, in that period in the Abbasid Caliphate, it was not just tolerance of Christians and Jews. There was tolerance of all kinds of other religions, new interactions with Hinduism and Zoroastrianism. They found weird, creative ways to make Hindus monotheists so they didn't have to hate them. And they actually supported even critics of religion. The Abbasid caliphs put a literal atheist in charge of the first hospital system in the world. Somebody who was writing books saying that all prophets are charlatans. And they still promoted the dude, because it was a peaceful time, and peaceful times tend to breed more tolerance. Violent times, chaotic times tend to breed more hate. And this is why, at the end of the day, if we focus on the exploitative nature of capitalism and the violence of imperialism and the exclusions that come through nationalism,
Hey, welcome to my world, trying to find words, Doc. You got a little taste of what I go through.
I used to stumble a lot more in speech. I've definitely gotten over much more of a speech impediment. But this these these features here encourage hatred, that because it's a kind of like violent competitive impulse. So you're going to bring out the worst in the different religions if you put those circumstances in place. If you take that stuff away, then all the better shit can come out. Those forces didn't exist at that point. Look at an example much later. Okay, so I'm going to take you into a 19th century Ottoman example, right? So, Ottoman Empire, officially Muslim state, generally very, very tolerant of minorities, right? With the Millet system, gave tons of autonomy to tons of different religious communities. No big deal at all there, right? But you put them into challenging circumstances like wars of independence, wars of nationalism, trying to break away from the empire. There's an Ottoman commander at one point responding to the Greek independence drive, saying, you know what, we should just straight up genocide these people. We should wipe them all out and then import a bunch of Muslims to take their homes, which is not typically a Muslim perspective. But the circumstances brought out that kind of extremism. And that's the key here, is if we can figure out the particular ideologies and circumstances that bring that out, if we actually criticize concepts like nationalism and capitalist imperialism, we have a way of getting back toward periods of greater tolerance and coexistence. But if you put people into those circumstances, whatever religion you're coming out of, the worst shit is going to rise to the surface.
Yeah, like we're seeing now. And do you feel that this age we're living in with social media has the potential to break that cycle? We're in a violent period right now, obviously. So you have passions are high, and according to the typical format that it's supposed to follow, is that we have this rise in division and violence towards each other. But I'm seeing a new path that we're starting to take. Rashy being I think a very good example of that I see in the pro-Palestinian movement, where the reaction to what's happening in Gaza is not a hatred towards Christians or a hatred towards Jews, but rather it's a hatred towards the ruling class fucking all of us over, the corruption, the imperialism, the colonialism, the predatory capitalism we're seeing. I'm seeing a reaction finally being directed in the proper manner that I interpret as possibly being a breaking of the cycle that you're speaking about, in which case we are living in revolutionary times. They say that, history repeats itself. Well, it doesn't repeat itself. It's poetry of the past. It rhymes with the past. It smells like the past, but I'm seeing that smell go away in this new movement. And Rashy is like at the heart of that. I always view her as this new era we're entering. And I didn't know, Rashy, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, so for Muslims, I mean, it's never been a problem with Jews or with Christians, and I think that's another misconception too. I mean, in Islam, Jews and Christians are considered Ahl Kitab, like the people of the book. There's a great respect for those religions. Our problem has always been with Zionism, you know, and that's why it's so dangerous trying to compare Zionism and Judaism, trying to make them one, because they're not. And I think we always make it clear that our problem is never with the Jews or the Jewish religion, or Christianity at all. It's always with Zionism. And I mean, I feel like Zionism at its core is Islamophobic. It's definitely racist. And so I think that's one of the hard things about the movement, is they always want to conflate those two. They always want it to, anything we say is considered anti-Semitic, no matter how much we say it has nothing to do with religion. It's about Israel and the Israeli government. It only helps them by continuing to put that label on it. So it's kind of tough for us when we're debating or we're trying to get our point across. But I think we always have to start out by showing our respect for other religions and making the distinction that this has nothing to do with religion and it's solely based on the government in Israel and the Zionist movement as a whole.
Yeah, there's actually been some significant improvements, across the last century in terms of the rhetoric used, and there's a lot more of that basic perspective that she's describing there is now coming to the fore, where there have been periods when particular uh, political movements, whether you're radical groups or governments or whatever, have attacked the countries and the peoples as a whole and have gotten much, much better at directing it toward the ideology. Let's criticize the ideology. So, where, Nasser would be like, yeah, fuck the Queen, fuck the English, instead you're getting to where, no, let's talk about the imperialism and capitalism and focusing on those ideologies instead, which actually it makes a lot more sense to do. And I've really, really appreciated a lot of those shifts. And then turning to criticize not just the outside elites, so Zionism or neoliberalism or things like that, but also the internal ones. You look at go back 15 years, whatever, to like the Gaza Youth Breaks Out manifesto, which starts off with fuck Hamas, fuck Fatah, fuck the UN, fuck the U.S. government. Like, it's all the different political structure. Everybody, it's not just one. It's like it's power structures that are fucking people over, but people just want to get along. I think one of the problems that we'll run into in dealing with some of this, and just to add a quick comment on the whole social media turn that we do see and the positive engagement that people have, there's a lot of that and a lot of places where people can begin to challenge those perspectives. But it's also sort of like being in a lifeboat with a hole in it and using a teacup to shovel the water out. You can do it. You can keep doing that. But all of our social media engagement is a teacup in a sinking lifeboat, because the structural features continue to breed hate, to continue to other people in order to support, just to sustain the existence of neoliberal capitalism and the nation state. You have to teach hate. So we're constantly trying to save people from what society is doing to them. But what we really need is much more systemic changes to break those power structures. And then the kind of tolerance that she's pointing to here can become the norm. And we can all talk about, our unique cultural and religious perspectives, but how much we all have in common, and let's all live together, blah, blah, blah. But the power structures are going to keep building that hate. We have to find a way to stop that, I think.
Yes, I agree. It's systemic. We have to attack the system. The system needs to be dismantled, and because we know that the big media corporations are always going to try to be using Islamophobia as a weapon and using these divisions. It's what they're built on. It's how they're structured. I'm very optimistic in seeing CNN and MSNBC and all these big news media groups just completely going in the shitter as far as viewership, and seeing podcasts like this one and and others rise up as a main source of news media, because it's nuanced. Like, the whole media system is built on these 10-minute segments meant to just warmonger or fearmonger, and it takes at least 3 hours or more to get a decent word in on and analyze a subject, which is why those forms of media are becoming more popular, and that gives me a lot of optimism on it. And maybe I'm looking at Rashy as too much of a thumb on the pulse. Maybe I'm seeing her as too much as an accurate metric of what's going on, but that's okay. I'm gonna continue in that confirmation bias when it comes to Rashy, because I think she's a prime example of some of the many warriors out there on social media who have made a conscious decision never to stoop low into hatred, into racism, into bigotry of any kind towards any group, and keep it on the subject at hand, which is corruption and its evil system that currently the people of Gaza are at the brunt of. They're feeling the most of it, and it's the most visceral manifestation of this corruption is just watching this genocide happen before our eyes.
Honestly, I agree with you though. I completely agree with you on Rashy, right? And I think that there is something really beautiful and powerful in that, and I want you to I want to clone the Rashis.
Yes, I want to. We need to clone
But at
Rashy.
the end of
We
the
need
day,
to clone her.
Rashi is a teacup, helping a sinking lifeboat. We need to turn that into a bucket, and then eventually what we have to do is say, instead of just scooping the water out and trying to make better and better ways to do that, we have to plug the freaking hole that's sinking us. We have to find a way to shift the emphasis to criticism of the power structures and make that normalized. Because on a personal level, as important as it is to have those dialogues and to have that patience and to show all the good sides of this and say, yes, Islam is not the threat to you, crap like that, we have to stop the structural forces that will keep breeding that hate, because it's going to get exhausting to play that teacup and to keep doing that work over and over again. And this is why people always drift away from this kind of activism. You get a big rise in certain circumstances, and then people forget about it and drift back away because you burn out. It's very difficult to sustain because we're dealing with the symptoms and not the causes.
Speaking of causes, I want to end this as on a final personal story that I want to talk about, and this kind of ties back to our last episode we did with you about anti-Semitism, and this involves an experience I had at Hebrew University. I had to take some of these mandatory courses, and I elected to take a course on Rashy, the rabbi. And it was fascinating. I loved the class because it was my first exposure to Talmudic thought and analyses. Now, the professor teaching the class was a rabbi. I deduced he was from either New York or New Jersey, but he was now an Israeli citizen and a professor at Hebrew University. And throughout, now it was mostly unknown that I was Christian in that class, which was mostly consisted of American Jews. And it was very obvious to me that this professor, he was older. He was, I would say, his 50s or 60s. I could tell that he had definitely a traumatic viewpoint of Christians. And he would hint to that by talking about how as a young child, he was often terrified by Christians in the United States. He would, like, for example, like hearing the song Onward Christian Soldiers, which is a hymn. You saw these little peeks into this man. You can tell he was obviously very Zionist, but I looked past the Zionist part of this guy and I saw the pain. I was no longer, like, this guy was 60 years old, but what I saw this young kid. I saw this young kid on a playground getting bullied by Christians. I saw the trauma that this older Jewish man experienced. And it was truly a reflective moment for me because I looked at this guy with such compassion because I saw his childhood. I could just look right through him. I saw him as a kid getting bullied by Christians. You fucking Jew, you fucking, you greedy little snobby Jew. I could just see the kids bullying him, and I could see the weaponization of Christianity being used against him in his childhood days. And it hurt me to see this old man who I can tell has not moved on from those traumatic experiences. And no doubt he immigrated to Israel to get away from that. And as a form of protecting himself, as a form of retreating to a bunker, like you had quoted earlier. And I realized that a lot of that, at the end of the day, a lot of this Zionism and this paranoia amongst Zionist Jews is a result of us asshole fucking Christians and the shit that we did to them. The racism that was pushed on them in places like New York City and the East Coast, where they were bullied and thrown rocks at, and Molotov cocktails, and the things that we don't hear about because it wasn't like the Shoah. It wasn't a full-on genocide, but there are aggressions that pop out that we don't talk about. And And that moment really hurt me, to see the pain in this old man, because I was completely a big fan of him. His intellect and learning about, Talmudic thought and, analyses of what the rabbis taught. It was fascinating to me. And it but it didn't matter, because the pain of how my people, the Christians, treated this old man resulted in this older man who's now a Zionist, and who's probably sees the Palestinians in the same light that he saw the kids who were bullying him in high school and elementary school. And I just thought back, wow, what have we fucking done as Christians? What have we done to this fucking world where we cause this type of trauma?
Can I share a traumatic moment like that?
Yes, sir. Please do.
Because when you mentioned that hymn, that Onward Christian Soldiers, Bart, it reminded me of an experience. Because I was put through Catholic schools. I was in a pretty Christian environment for, although, I mean, I did 12 years at Catholic school, so that's a fun story. But just the kind of reflexive attitudes that were still around, when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s. Okay, so think about, as a Jewish person, listening to tons of Christian hymns, right? And there's the subtext in a lot of them that does go back to a lot of hate, but there's also people who build on that hate and get much more overt with it. I had, in my circle of friends, there were some folks that had a lot of really horrifying attitudes that I had to listen to. It's Jingle Bells, right? But we're not on TikTok, so I can say something that I wouldn't normally say there. But these words, they're scarring. They're stuck in my head, because you just change the words but use the melody. So I got dashing through the snow in a black Mercedes Benz, killing all the Jews. We are Hitler's friends. And I'm like, what the fuck? And like, once you hear people singing that around Christmas, right, that shit stays with you forever. Like,
oh yeah, it does.
Those are memories that I have of that kind of reflexive hatred from kids, because they picked that up in an environment that has had a kind of Christian nationalism implanted in it. And when you learn that kind of shit as kids, it's really hard to later challenge those perspectives. For a person like that, the Jew is always the other. So yeah, being othered is just, it's something a lot of us will have to experience in our lives. But we have to find a way to really criticize what makes that possible, what makes it possible for children to want to twist a Christmas Carol in such an evil way. But yeah, like I said, I don't want us to have to depend upon just individuals having the right kind of circumstances and having an awakening like you're describing, or forcing the Rashys of the world to keep playing teacup and scoop out the water as we're sinking. We have to find a way to stop the hatreds that make it possible for children to sing Nazi Christmas carols. There's something really fucked up about kids singing Nazi Christmas carols that is never going to leave me. So I bet. I bet. And for some people, because of the way encounters with the other affect our identity formation, it's pretty easy for people to fall into those Zionist discourses, to think it defensively, to think the whole world's out to get me, it's never going to stop, they're going to keep hating me, and therefore I have to be the one that has the gun and the boot, right? So if we defeat the hatreds and the structural features that build on those hatreds, then that trauma we can finally get over. But that trauma is very deeply ingrained. And what Muslims in the West are experiencing now, with growing Islamophobia, is something that Jews have put up with for a very long time among Christians. And it's had really nasty effects. And I don't want us to keep going down that road, If we want to defeat, I make this point a lot to people. If you want to defeat like terror and the violence and the hatreds that spread around the world, deal with what causes the hatreds. Going around there playing whack-a-mole and attacking a terrorist isn't going to stop terrorism. it's just gonna create more of that trauma that allows hateful people to exploit that and teach hatred. And we've
I can't tell you how many experiences I had over there when in talking with West, like IDF soldiers who were from, in the Western Hemisphere. I met a Canadian one time who was managing a hostel, and the the common theme that I was getting from a lot of these IDF soldiers who recruited from out of country was that they were bullied for being Jews, and now they can finally be in a Jewish army. It says, you know what, I'm gonna. It's like that's that reflexive hatred, where it's like, you know what, I was bullied for being Jewish, so you know what, I'm gonna join the most badass, righteous army on the planet, and I'm going to show them that us Jews were not weak. And guess who takes the brunt of that? Innocent Palestinians who have nothing to do with what some fucking asshole over in Canada, what some Christian asshole did to a Jewish kid on the playground in fucking Canada or in New York City. Palestinians have to pay for that shit. And I have to blame two parties. Obviously the person using that reflexive hatred, but also the fucking assholes back in the West who are bullying Jews into and instilling this trauma in them, where they have this, fight or flight reaction to everybody around them. And guess who's around them in Israel? Innocent Palestinians, beautiful people.
You hit a very important point there that I think people need to understand, because when we talk about this kind of hatred, it's not giving a free pass to these violent Zionists or something, right? It's trying to understand the psychological dimensions. How do you take somebody from Brooklyn and end up putting him in a situation where he's actively ethnically cleansing, massacring Palestinians, right? You have to understand the hatred that drove him to that. That doesn't mean we don't criticize what he's doing. It doesn't mean we don't stop what he's doing. But if we want to stop that from continuing to happen over and over, that's the problem here, is we keep repeating these cycles. We don't actually criticize the core ideologies, the circumstances. One of them is there is an ingrained theological basis in Christianity that preaches hate, but that's been taken and emphasized by nationalist movements, by empire and capital, and turned into something far more violent even than it ever was before, where realistically what we should have done was just gotten over it. Like, that's what, like, the whole in the 1960s, the Vatican looked at that and said, you know what, I guess we're not going to blame Jews for all time for killing Jesus, but they'd done it for 2,000 years. But they took it away. They said, you know what, we can change this. All of it can change. But if we only tackle it on that theological level or on a personal level, and we don't deal with the structural circumstances that keep teaching hate and scaring people, then this country's going to keep exporting. Some of the most violent people in Palestine are Americans, right? We keep exporting assholes because they're experiencing hatred and othering here in the same way that Jews experienced in Europe for centuries. It still exists. It's not as bad as it was in some ways, but it's still very much there, and part of people's lived experience. And that trauma can easily tip people over the edge into being terrible people. So you're right. We have to attack it on two levels. We can't give them a free pass, but if we only preach a responding hatred and we don't really understand how they got to be that way, then all we're going to do is we're going to keep letting more people be radicalized in that way.
Yes, exactly. I mean, Rashy, I think you've talked about this to me. You've vented to me in these debates you've had on these lives. I believe there was an Israeli that you had befriended on one of the lives who seemed very, sympathetic to the pro-Palestinian cause. At least he appeared to be moderate at first, but then but then you saw him become radicalized, and to your shock and disappointment, you were taken aback by how that radicalization happened with this guy.
Yeah, what's crazy is that he said he was radical, like, at first when the recent conflict kind of first started, and then he kind of calmed down and was like super understanding and super like open to change and stuff. And then I don't know what happened. I don't know if he spent a little too much time on the other side, but like completely did a 180 and and flipped to be radical and started calling Palestinians like the cancer of the world and stuff like that. So I mean, yeah, it was disappointing, but you become who you surround yourself with, you know. So I kind of saw the environment that that person was in, and I don't know if they were. I feel like a lot of people become more radical on either side when they surround themselves with people who agree with them. And he was definitely among people that are completely on the other side. So I don't know if he felt like he needed to like really, you know, win them over. I don't know. But yeah, it was really disappointing to see. But for the most part, I think I've seen actually a lot of people come out of it and sort of denounce Zionism. A lot of Jews too. So that's been really refreshing to see.
Me too. Me too. And honestly, Rashy, it's people like you. I cannot underestimate the effect that people like you have in this discussion, because you are very much a bridge for people who are steeped in this radical ideology to come over to reason, because you don't judge. I noticed that with you. You've been very, you've not been judgmental at all of people to their, who have certain pasts, who have certain ideologies now. You've been giving them that ability to cross over. And so I can't praise you enough for that, Rashy, because like I said, you helped me come out of my shell and feel comfortable expressing myself and my story in an environment that was full of landmines. So again, I want, like the doc said, let's clone you and make you systemic. I would rather that you become the systemic disease.
But beyond that too, like, because again, I'll heap on the same kind of praise. I love that there are great people out there doing this, but no matter how big we make that bucket, it's still going. The boat is still sinking. So we have to make it easier for people to do that by tackling the systemic challenges. And then you unleash your army of Rashis to reach people. But as long as the hole is still in the boat, we're still screwed. It's going to keep producing more and more hate, more and more radicalism. You're going to produce, everything from the genocidal Jewish terror to, but also like the kind of Christian terrorists, Muslim terrorists. They're all out there. There's a pathway to radicalization that exists for people all over the world because the circumstances are messed up. And I don't like that we have to keep putting so much responsibility onto people like her to deal with all this shit, because it's just going to keep building up, and then they have to clean up the mess. And I think that what we have to do is find some way to tackle the root causes, so that then a real social transformation can come about through these positive engagements, because you're back in a situation like you're mentioning with Beit al-Hikmah earlier, like where the political circumstances allowed for flourishing of tolerance and cooperation. The potential does exist, but not in our current political and economic system. It's going to keep pushing us toward greater radicalization.
I agree. Well, I think unless you guys have any further thoughts, I think we're at the 3.5 hour mark. I could go on forever about this, but I know, you guys have your daily lives, and I know it's Ramadan, Rashy. So speaking of which, on a lighter note, like I said, I incorporate Islam into my daily life and have been. However, this is the first time I've ever tried to attempt Ramadan fasting. Now, when I say attempt, I mean a very half-assed attempt. I've been keeping to the food portion of it. Drinking water, smoking, all that other stuff, I'm completely not keeping to. And by the way, I've been saying a lot of positive things about Palestinians and their influence on me. I'm going to say one negative thing. Okay, my nicotine habit, I can directly attribute to the Palestinians. Okay, when I was with them, they smoke like a train. When I was doing a pack and a half a day with those guys, and it's never stopped. This nicotine habit is permanent thanks to Palestinians. So if I'm not keeping Ramadan to their standards, it's because of them, that they got me addicted to that shit. So I will say one negative thing about
I couldn't tell you how many times I've been sitting there in cafes and having a conversation. They're constantly trying to pass the hookah to me, like, "You're dude." Like, no, I don't.
oh, hookah.
Yeah, I don't.
Do not get me started on
Thank
hookah.
you. I don't want the addiction, but like, it's just constant, and you're trying to find every time the politest way you can. No, please, I don't want. But because once you get into it, that.
But I'm telling you, the Palestinians, they do the double apple nakhla tobacco with the genuine faham. I'm telling you, it's the best experience when you're eating hummus and warm, that warm, potent Palestinian olive oil dripping down on it, and you're eating with the. I'm telling you, the experience I can't replicate. So, but I'll tell you what, this Ramadan, oh man, I am so hungry. We were at In-N-Out Burger, and I'm looking at the burger, and it's so juicy, and it's got the cheese melted on it, and I'm just like, come on, Mark, just stay with it. So I've been good at the fasting part of the food. I can't forego water though. That's just, I can't do it. And I definitely, but you know what's funny is, it wasn't until yesterday that finally the effects of Ramadan fasting really started to kick in on like a spiritual level. I started to think about people who are starving. That was one of the effects that finally set in. And that's when I was like, oh, that is like Ramadan is, in my opinion, is a very healthy practice for anybody. And people do not understand the positive effects of fasting has, but just finally hitting that spiritual moment where it's like, oh, I'm hungry. My stomach is growling. There's people in Gaza who are hungry. And now I'm realizing, oh, okay, Ramadan is, this thing. Okay.
They're fasting and breaking their fast on grass.
On grass water. I mean, how, just, sidebar on Ramadan, like what effect has that had on your life? Like what does it mean to you going through this Ramadan period? It's obviously very pivotal it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I'm hungry right now, Rashy.
You just have to take a deep breath and recenter yourself. You'll be fine. No, Ramadan is obviously we're used to it by now, but this one in particular has been tough because thinking about the people in Gaza that are fasting, and like here, we're fasting all day, but we know a meal is coming when the sun goes down. Whatever we want to eat, and over there they're breaking their fast, like I said, on grass, and it, it's just horrible. And there's definitely this sense of guilt, um, you know, in our culture. It's like, especially in Ramadan, it's like you cook a lot, and there's always a lot of food. So kind of trying to remind yourself to not be excessive with it. Because always thinking about the people in Gaza who have nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been particularly tougher this year, but um, yeah,
On a spiritual level, how has it affected you? Like that, not necessarily in context with what's happening in Gaza, but in
mhm.
general, the spiritual effects. What spiritual effects does it have on you as a Muslim when you observe Ramadan?
I mean, it's you don't realize when you're not, when you're not eating and drinking. It seems like there's so much more time in the day. And so in Ramadan, one of the things that you're supposed to do is you give up all like temptation, and you get closer to God. You kind of you read more, you study more, uh, you're kinder to people. You just kind of center yourself in the faith, and your world kind of revolves around that for the month versus like outside um, distractions. Um, so it's difficult, obviously, but it's so rewarding at the same time.
I can echo that with the sort of fasting practices with some of the Jewish holy days as well, because there's something similar in terms of the communal practices around it. It gives you time to to study, to read, to be in community, and then you get together with people and you can break fast together collectively. There's something beautiful about that. And I think having that as a regular feature of a religious culture can really teach a kind of the the Thanksgiving that you might talk that Christians might talk about but don't live in much the same way, because it makes you much more appreciative of the things that you have. You know, when you go without, it gives you an opportunity to reflect on, oh gosh, yeah, these other people in this other country are starving right now, and maybe I should, be more thankful for this, but maybe I should also do something about their suffering and care more about it. It gives you time to reflect on things like that. At least that's one of the ways that I've always taken out of it. It's always just made me think about how easy it is for me to go and break my fast at any point. But other people never have that choice. They're living through a famine or something,
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I'd love to see more people take on practice like what you're doing. Like you're trying to take on some of this, and even though it's not your faith, you're trying to adopt some of that as a practice yourself, as a spiritual practice. I think some kind of ritualized fasting is really useful. In giving you the ability to spend time thinking about what you're grateful for, and realistically, with Ramadan too, and just for the Americans who have no idea what that. I mean, the Ramadan fast is about thanking God for sending Quran in the first place, for sending the revelation. It gives you an opportunity to reflect upon that, which is an opportunity then to reflect on all the good things that come with that, which again, in Islam's case, can be that social justice component, and maybe I should care about other people's hunger, But I think just in general, that fasting practices can be very useful, if you put them to use in that way.
Yes. Yeah. And I do that. I do it on Yom Kippur as well. But I that's why I always emphasize with my family who's Christian to appreciate the Jewish holidays, like the utility of Yom Kippur. It cannot be understated. It's a beautiful concept where you reflect on the things where you fucked up. It's that self-reflection. It's saying, hey, like, because we're raised in the society of like, always pat yourself on the back. You're a good guy. You're a good guy. You're a good guy. But Yom Kippur is where you say, no, where did I fuck up? What have I done wrong? What can I improve on? And I'm just thinking to myself, like, guys, why aren't we as Christians holding to these holidays? They're beautiful. We just toss them aside.
There's something by God, I wish Christians would take in from Yom Kippur, because what we do on Yom Kippur is, okay, you want to seek forgiveness for things. You want to reflect on what you did wrong, right? But you cannot actually get forgiveness for wrongdoing without actually addressing it with the person. You have to seek forgiveness first. God is never going to forgive you until you have already sought forgiveness for what you did wrong. Like, it's telling you to fix something here. This is something that Judaism and Islam have in common, that they're focused a lot on how to fix shit here. Where in Christianity, there's so much more of an emphasis only on the afterlife and what's to come, that you think you can just turn to God only and gain forgiveness there, and then just ignore the fact that you did this horrifying shit to other people, so you never actually deal with the problem. If Christians could re-borrow that element from Judaism that they started with, and think that, because the early Christian communities maintained a lot of these practices, they just fell out of favor. Seeking forgiveness from the people that you have wronged forces you to take responsibility for what you did wrong. Whereas if you're only turning to God on that, you're never actually dealing with it, which means you can keep doing the same evil shit over and over again.
Yep, it's one of the worst evolutions of Christianity that happened, was this idea, oh, you're covered by the blood of Jesus, so you have a free bill of health, a free bill of spiritual health. You don't have to worry about all the bad things you did. You're a new creature. And if you do it again, guess what? You can get forgiven again. It's this cop-out that I've seen evolve in Christianity, and I fucking hate it. And in fact, that was one of the key changes that Islam had into my life as a Christian, was the fact that there's one conversation I had with a Palestinian Muslim. We were sitting down and he said, Mark, we as Muslims, we never, I don't know if this is indicative of all of Muslims, but this particular Muslim I was talking to, this Palestinian, told me that we never assume that we're going to heaven. We never assume that. And he told me, Mark, don't ever assume that, because the reason why you never assume that is because you can get complacent in where you are in life, and you should always seek to improve. And that I took and I incorporated it into my belief system. And I'm like, you know what? Jesus said the same thing. He says, do not say I did well or I did a good thing. He said, call yourself a worthless servant. You could do more. And it sounds rough. It sounds very harsh. But the idea behind it is never pat yourself on the back for doing a good thing, because you should have been doing that anyways. And there's plenty more good to do in the world. So it holds us to a standard that I think has a great utility in our culture, So Rashy, you have any final words that you want to express? Yeah, I know us guys have been talking. The guy that has the hair and the guy that doesn't have the hair have been talking this whole time. So
No,
you're
I've been listening and learning a lot. But no, thank you for having me. I mean, it's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
It was a beautiful conversation, and I love the dynamics between the three of us in this conversation, and I hope that it gets replicated amongst our society, and I hope the systemic change that Doc talks about happens soon. Something to pray about if you're Muslim, something to definitely work towards politically if you're not religious at all, and something to definitely incorporate if you're a Christian. And so, like I said, we have 3 holidays of the 3 Abrahamic faith happen to aligning with each other today. So I find it to be a fitting time to do this episode. It wasn't intentional. It just happened to be that way. So I know we're on 3 hours and 45 minutes with you guys. Sorry to keep you so long, but I'm not sorry. So I appreciate your time on this, Doc. That being said, we'll sign out officially on this, but Doc, are we seeing Dune 2 at some point? What's going on?
If you'd like to, I would not mind seeing it again. It was fantastic. It's definitely something that I think benefits from the presentation in cinema anyway. So I would totally see it again.
Okay, well, shoot me a message. Let's figure this out. I haven't seen it yet, and I want to. Oh man, the idea of watching Dune 2 with Professor O'Mara. Holy fucking shit, dude! Like that's fucking trippy. I'm gonna the honor.
Yeah, I think it's a fine adaptation of the story, and I really like what they're trying to do in showing just, I don't know, the problematic dimensions of being sucked into this sort of messianic role, and the way that it's very easy to justify doing terrible things in the service of some kind of perceived greater good. There's a lot of depth actually to the Dune story that I think they're doing a good job of trying to draw out. So I'm really looking forward to a third film in this and seeing how they pull it out, because there's some horrible shit in Dune Messiah that we're going to see Paul fall to. But there's that whole, it really gets to the difficulty of that kind of prophetic or messianic position. It can be compromising, but it's hard to hold to the good in that whole process. So it's really interesting in its religious dimensions as well as the political and everything else. So yeah, it's a great story. But I've enjoyed this as a chat too. And honestly, one thing that I have enjoyed in some of the other shows I've seen, like there's a show that I was on a few times years back where there's 3 normal hosts and they're always talking amongst themselves, and they'll bring on a guest. So you have more of this roundabout. You're building off different ideas. So
yes,
this,
I love it.
When you and Greg are on together, bringing on multiple guests could create a really interesting conversational dynamic that I think a lot of people would like.
Yeah. The sky's the limit with this podcast. We're excited to explore all the different new territories and formats of how we can do this. I particularly like this idea of, when I have you on, developing hypotheses, presenting it to you, and then having you pick it apart. I think that we just stumbled onto that unknowingly, but I was reflecting on our previous conversation. I'm like, wait a minute, I think we might have discovered a new style of podcasting. I don't know. Maybe not.
No, there should be a time when we can go back and dig into that one a bit more, because the way that the way that you're beginning to frame the differences and why Islam is so threatening, there is an element of truth to that. And just as there is an element of truth to like some of the reasons that Christians turned on Jews. You know, there are specific things about both peoples that they did find threatening to the overall power structure. But the key there is to understand how those ideas relate to the power structure so we know where to criticize it, where to attack it. Because it can't be done on a purely theological level. It has to deal with all these different structural features that drive it, right? That make those ideas threatening. So you are onto something interesting there that I think, you know, as a hypothesis we could develop if you're interested.
I definitely am, most definitely. How about this? We talk about it pre-game. We will pre-game on that before we see Dune too. Do that, and then we'll go more into that. Yeah, I'm down. I'm so psyched. Rashy, I'm so thankful for you. I hope you know that, you making me feel comfortable and giving me that moral encouragement that you've always done to be able to express myself in my raw, dumbass redneck form that I do. So I really appreciate you in that regard. And, Ramadan Kareem, I'm going to try to fight through Ramadan, and I might send you a message now and then saying, "Hey, I'm hungry. What are you going to tell me? I want that burger." But, so anyways, guys, I really appreciate you coming on and sacrificing, 4 hours out of your day, out of your Sunday of all times during the holiday season, and for all my Jewish friends out there, Hag Sameach, Purim. I'm going to be taking my son to a Purim celebration circus today. So I'm psyched about that. So I'm going to tackle the rest of this day with a positive spirit. And everybody, prayers up for the people of Gaza who are not able to break fast and who are suffering under the worst conditions imaginable. Just think of all the mothers, think of all the fathers who are just trying to reach for anything that could feed their kids. Think about that. Okay. So anyways, love you guys so much. Thanks for coming on. I don't know what the next episode is going to be. Greg is with us in spirit. But he's going to be back the next episode, so sorry you had to put up with me this whole fucking time, but I'm what you got for today. So, all right. Love you guys. You have a great Sunday.
Thank you. Bye.